everybody, ScotsThinker here, and today we are going to go over the theme of companionship as seen in the Team Ico Games. Yeah, I'm just going to call them Team Ico Games because you guys in the comments kept insisting I call them the Ico Games. I mean, okay, side tangent. I think if you're going to go ahead and call this Ico, it probably would have made sense to spell it as I-K-O instead of I-C-O, because it's still... pronunciation and the way it's spelled is still a bit strange to me, but for simplicity's sake, I'm gonna call it Ico just for you guys. So, if you've played the Team Ico games, or at least have a thorough knowledge of them, you'll notice that there's a theme of companionship throughout these games. There's many themes: light versus darkness, isolation, ruined settings that tower over the characters. But especially companionship as it relates to ludonarrative harmony that enhances the narratives of these games. Companionship is one of the main emotional hooks of these games, especially for Ico and The Last Guardian. With Shadow of the Colossus, it's more debatable because the main emotional hook for that game is the main character's motivation to bring a dead woman back to life. There is this ongoing topic in Shadow of the Colossus that you don't even need aggro most of the time when you're fighting most of the Colossi. But be honest, you want to traverse the vast majority of the lands with aggro, and good luck fighting the Sandworm Colossus without aggro, I'm just saying. Throughout these games, a common gameplay mechanic is the fact that you are granted at least one companion. With Ico, your companion is Ueda. In Shadow of the Colossus, your companion is Aggro the horse. And in The Last Guardian, it's the main attraction itself, Trico. All these games present a companion character for you to grow a bond with, and the bond grows throughout the game, especially in The Last Guardian's case. The reason why these companionships work so well in regards to ludonarrative harmony in the gameplay is because one of the key aspects of these narratives is the bond that the player character will make with a companion character. Of course, it's not the sole aspect, but these games do place a lot of emphasis on the companionship throughout these games. In case you've forgotten, ludonarrative harmony is basically this concept of how well the game's story and the game itself meshes well together. And these games are an excellent example of this. So, for example, let's take a look at Ico. In Ico, this is a puzzle platformer game in which your aim is to escape the ruins. And much of your dependency to escape depends on your ability to collaborate with your escort companion, Ueda. Ueda is, of course, the light princess in this setting. And she is the only one who can open these doors, which also simultaneously zaps nearby demonic enemies. And you have to fend off the monsters that are trying to take Ueda away. And so the two of you are collaborating together. During puzzles, if you get stuck for too long, Ueda will point to a vital clue in case you're stuck. This not only works well with Fumito Ueda's design by subtraction philosophy of not needing a heads-up indicator to tell you where to go, and thus using a character to tell you what to pay attention to, but it's also a great way to enhance the bond, as if to imply that Ueda is figuring out the puzzle along with you. In fact, one of the things that Ueda points out very early on to the player is the bench in which Ico and Ueda can rest on. Now, these benches depend on Ico and Ueda sitting together with. Of course, these days we have the luxury of games that can automatically save, or sometimes with the likes of Alien Isolation and several Resident Evil games, they make the saving mechanic rather restrictive on purpose to add the intensity of the horror aspect. And certainly there's a similar mechanic in Dark Souls, and I can see why this game inspired the creator of Dark Souls. So these benches that allow you to save the game demand that the two of you sit together, because if it's just one of you, it's not going to work. So this encourages the necessity for the both of you to get through certain areas together. certainly there are plenty of games like the Halo series where one player can just go to a certain area and then the other player will automatically just jump to another place just to make it easier. And certainly there's a lot of LEGO games that have a lot of fun in regards to companionship, but the Team Ico games take it one step further in a narrative sense, arguably, by having the characters form a bond with each other within the gameplay itself. It should be emphasized that there's a part of the game where Ico and Ueda are separated. So when Ico finds a bench to sit on, you can't save the game because Ueda's not there with you to save the game on that bench. So that enhances not only the tensity in not goofing up, but also further enhances the bond, because you'll notice that the bond you make with these characters become quite powerful, especially, funnily enough, during moments when characters are separated from each other. It's the whole notion of you don't know how good you had it until it's gone kind of thing. And there will be moments throughout these games when your player character is separated from your companion for a variety of reasons. Whether it be because there's a certain area that your companion character can't gain access to and you can, or for rather tragic reasons, there will be separation. And when that separation happens, you feel it. You really feel it, especially with how isolated these settings are. These isolated settings can have a variety of effects on the player. It can be rather oppressive at times, as well as wondrous and mysterious. Of course, having a companion character gives players a bond to know that they're not alone in this rather isolated area. And ultimately, the bond between Ico and Ueda grows so strong that Ueda returns the favor to Ico by the end of the game. In the case of Shadow of the Colossus, Agro is the one and only companion of the game, and it's interesting how the players could complete most of the game without even needing aggro most of the time, and yet players use aggro anyway because the area is just so vast, and traversing the lands is made much easier by riding on aggro, especially with certain areas where aggro can make big leaps. And there's also other moments, there's other aspects of these mechanics. There's these added aspects of riding aggro that didn't need to be added into the game, and yet there's these added mechanics to riding aggro that Fumito Ueda and his team added in. They didn't need to add them in, but because they did, it enhances the bond that the players can have with aggro. For example, you have the option to pull off these stunts whilst you're riding aggro. They're not necessary. In fact, they may be a bit fiddly at times, but you can do them. And it indicates the bond between Wander and Aggro with how trained of a horseman he is, and by extension, how much time he spent with Aggro in order to pull these stunts off. And you also have the option of petting Aggro if you equip Wander with his bare hands and just press the interaction button by Aggro. As far as this game's earlier coding goes, it doesn't really do anything to enhance any statistics as far as I'm aware, but the option is there for the sake of further immersion. Always remember that Fumito Ueda's intention with these games is to immerse the player, and part of what makes this immersion so riveting is the relationships formed throughout these games. Not only is aggro a great means to traverse the land, but given how vast and empty this place is, and the only other company you get is this evil counterfeit deity and a dead woman, yeah, aggro seems to be the only viable choice for a companion throughout the whole game, which makes that last bridge sequence between Wander and aggro all the more heart-wrenching, because at that moment, your one and only companion basically sacrifices herself so that you can keep going, which further emphasizes the themes that Wander is trying to fulfill his quest at the expense of everyone around him, including himself. Then, of course, you have The Last Guardian, in which Fumito Ueda took back the positive feedback from the character of aggro and amplified it even further for Trico. I remember talking to a friend about the Team Ico Games, and The Last Guardian was brought up in conversation, and he described that The Last Guardian had the most realistic depiction of animal behavior ever seen, because Fumito Ueda has gone out of his way to depict Trico as a legit animal with a mind of his own. Of course, you can see elements of this with Aggro in Shadow of the Colossus, and the fact that Aggro has a bit of mind of her own sometimes, and that controlling the horse riding feels more like Wander controlling the horse rather than directly controlling the horse like you do in so many other games. That lack of direct input for an animal character is amplified with Trico, and the whole puzzle platformer basis for this game is learning how to communicate with this character. And because you never directly control Trico, it makes the bond you form with Trico that much more special when Trico does help you out, when he does conquer his fears, when he does manage to obey your input. And the AI of Trico is programmed so that the further into the game you go, the more that Trico will be willing to obey player characters' commands. When you start off, Trico doesn't immediately obey the player character. He'd much rather scratch an itch in his ear than obey what the player character has to say. So this game has to encourage patience in regards to the player character. And to the people who got frustrated with the player character, I can understand frustration with the controls, but the frustration with Trico, well, they're missing the point.
Eye colours representing his mood and whether or not he'll listen to you. How you can call to Trico just before you throw him something so he's more likely to catch it. How when you're telling him to go somewhere or interact with something, if you keep on holding the direction where you're pointing him to do it, you'll see his head click onto the thing that he's supposed to be interacting with. I get the feeling a lot of people didn't even realise that you can command Trico to jump towards something by holding the direction that you want him to jump while commanding him. It's all about giving you the bare mechanics and giving you the chance to be intuitive enough to work out when, where, and how they can be used in more seemingly complex situations, by nothing but pure interaction, and I love that.
It does feel like opposite Ico, as it were, then, where you have two characters which are both using each other as a means to an end and can protect each other in different ways. And against Ico, of course, where you have Ico and Yorda, and Ico is more powerful and has to protect Yorda from beginning to end, and Yorda doesn't do much in the grand scheme of things apart from opening doors and helping out with maybe a puzzle or two. So it's a nice twist on the formula.
So it's interesting how Ico and The Last Guardian place a lot of emphasis on companionship more than the other entries in the series, arguably. And that's mainly thanks to the fact that the games themselves have a lot of puzzles that depend on the player character and the companion working together. I suppose it's thematically appropriate then that Shadow of the Colossus is a much more isolating experience because Wander is this tragic anti-villain character, and the fact that Wander's doing most of his acts on his own emphasizes how much in vain his quest is. Whereas these characters in Ico and The Last Guardian are much more selfless by comparison. There'll be many moments in The Last Guardian where you think you're going to collapse or fail, but Trico jumps in, and these moments are all the more rewarding because you took the time to bond with Trico, because you took the time to learn to communicate and to understand Trico like an actual relationship. And it's just as well Ueda uses minimal cutscenes in these games. He'll use cutscenes when he needs them, but a lot of the time, and you'll see this especially in The Last Guardian, if important gameplay elements can be conveyed through gameplay, he will do it. There's so many moments where there's these Uncharted-worthy action sequences that could have easily have been these elaborate cutscenes, but the game gets the player character to go through these sequences, go through these intense sequences, and then experience through the gameplay how much Trico has grown, how much this bond has grown stronger. And there's also this option in The Last Guardian to seek out more barrels. Obviously, in The Last Guardian, there's moments where you have to feed Trico a certain amount of barrels in order to feed him, in order to get him to get going again. But there's other parts in the game where you don't need to find certain barrels, but you can do so anyway, just out of genuine kindness. And it's optional.
I mean, this game's idea of optional challenge is just finding all the food barrels for Trico. It's not essential whatsoever, apart from a few times that you can't advance without feeding him. But what I didn't realise is that I was going out of my way to find these hidden barrels, not because of a reward I was expecting at the end of the game or anything, but just because I wanted to do it for my companion. And that kind of symbiotic relationship I haven't experienced in a game in a long time. I connected with this, and I feel doing it all through gameplay makes it a million times more worth it, despite how annoying it can sometimes look.
And this optional kindness can actually reward the player character with alternative costumes. There's other moments in the game where they're not really necessary for progress, but they do give this sense of increasing the relationship, such as this option to pet Trico, rub Trico's head so much that Trico will eventually yawn and take a nap. Or another option where you can just play around in a certain area and Trico can just interact with you. Either way, there's this growing sense of affection, and the AI is geniusly made in Trico, in which he'll learn the certain patterns of the character. So, what's the general takeaway from all this? Ludonarrative harmony is used to enhance the themes of companionship by interweaving these stories about friendships in isolated areas and using that as the main crux for these puzzle platformer games, where the player and the companions have to not only work together in order to get from point A to point B, but also to find comfort and worth and value in each other to help people overcome their own flaws and shortcomings, of course. That's not really the case with Shadow of the Colossus because that's a tragedy, but you get what I mean. The sense of companionship is all the more enhanced by the fact that you have controller input that directly ties into the themes of companionship in the game, hence the ludonarrative harmony of the gameplay and the story meshing well together. In Ico, you can literally hold down the R1 button to hold Yorda's hand and guide her through the place, thus having this, for lack of a better term, intimate sense of being together through thick and thin and guiding each other well. And this direct controller input to pet aggro and to perform stunts on aggro, that's also ludonarrative harmony. The various ways you can interact with Trico, the way you pet Trico, the way you care for, attend to Trico's wounds, the fact that much of the gameplay is revolved around Trico, all the controller inputs and the commands you can put on the controller go back to the narrative themes of companionship. So Fumito Ueda places a lot of emphasis on companionship, and people get emotionally hooked onto these games because of this companionship input that further adds to the ludonarrative harmony of these games, which makes them all the more immersive. And if Fumito Ueda can immerse you, he's done his job. So, what do you think about Fumito Ueda's themes of companionship, and how do you think this can help you relate to others? Let me know in the comments down below, and I look forward to further discussions about these enlightening games. In the meantime, ScotsThinker signing out.